All right, so this is M54 hazardous waste. So going along with what we've been talking about as far as pollutants go. So remember, pollutants are 30% of the test, so that's quite a big chunk. But hazardous waste, what is deemed hazardous waste? So what are the qualifications that would deem something as hazardous waste versus just regular waste? So be able to classify that. And then basically the best way to reduce hazardous waste or to dispose of hazardous waste is to reduce it in the first place. So that would be going back to our source reduction. How can we minimize the environmental damage and the disposal? Well, if we get rid of the amount that we have, or at least reduce the amount that we have, then it makes it a whole lot easier to dispose of hazardous waste because there's a lot less of it. All right, so then moving over here, this picture up here, this figure, it shows Superfund sites. And so we have one here in Redding, and you can see that in Northern California, the little green dot. So basically, Iron Mountain, we've talked about, is the most acidic place on Earth, but it's a Superfund site because it's toxic, hazardous waste from the mine going into Keswick. And so, obviously that's not okay. So they made it a Superfund site, and it's ongoing, probably endless cleanup. We take the different pools of waste that come out of the mine, and we treat it with lime and other things to make it less acidic and able to be disposed of and go back into the river before it goes downstream. But know what RCRA is and CERCLA. So RCRA, basically this is cradle to grave. Is what it's known as. And so cradle to grave is monitoring hazardous waste from the time that it's made, so cradle, to the time that it is disposed of, which is grave. So the EPA goes in and they kind of monitor, they deem what's hazardous waste. They go in and they monitor, how it's made, how it's used, how it's disposed of. So that's RCRA. So it's just to protect human health and natural environment, reducing or eliminating those hazardous waste. The EPA is the one that maintains this, so the Environmental Protection Agency, and they look at that and monitor it throughout cradle to grave. And then CERCLA has to do with Superfunds. So CERCLA is a Superfund Act, it's also known as. And so it's taxing the chemical and petroleum industries for monitoring, cleanup, restoration of mines, or any other thing that they're doing as far as not just leaving it. So not just leaving something an environmental hazard. And this is mostly mining or environmental hazardous waste facilities. And so it allows the government to kind of monitor this and release hazardous chemicals slowly. So like at Iron Mountain, instead of just having all of that toxic waste, which is natural, it's naturally occurring, but it's produced because of the mining activities. But they take it and they have different pools that they put different things in, like lime or a variety of things, to reduce the acidity. And then they slowly release that into Keswick instead of just having it all run off and all released at once. So that's kind of the point of CERCLA and these Superfund acts, and or Superfund areas. And you can see there's quite a few. So throughout the world, or throughout the U.S., California has the second most amount of Superfund sites. And mostly, you look at the East, and there's a lot in the East, but those states are really small. So per state, California is second. But if we look at where, the majority of that is over on the East. And then what is meant by tracking something from cradle to grave? So that would be our RCRA again. And tracking something from the time it's made to the time it is disposed of. And then be familiar with Love Canal. Love Canal is probably the most famous Superfund site. And so basically it's a hazardous waste area that they basically built housing and all kinds of stuff on top of it, but it wasn't quite ready. It wasn't quite restored, wasn't quite ready for that. And so a lot of people were getting very sick. And so just some normal people, normal citizens, became aware of it and, kind of protested or brought to attention the government as far as this is not okay. And they ended up doing something about it. So that comes up often as the Love Canal. So just be familiar with that and know how regular people that have no background in this, became activists and ended up being able to do some significant work with it. And so that's kind of important too. So just the regular people doing something about it, and the fact that it was hurting children. That's kind of why it's the most famous. And then on this last part, how is a brownfields program different from a Superfund site? Well, brownfield is taking care of hazardous waste, but it's hazardous waste from small areas. So think of a gas station, for example, closing. So you can't just, you can't just build on it right away. You have to kind of restore it, kind of look at any waste that's leaked out, take the tanks out of the ground. There's small things that need to be done. It's not necessarily a toxic waste, facility, but it's definitely something that that needs to be mitigated before we build on it. Same thing with a landfill. So we are able to build on landfills eventually, but they need to be properly taken care of before. So that's a brownfield program. So taking care of these small areas, restoring them, making them able to be used again, versus a Superfund site, which may never be used again, potentially, and it's extremely hazardous area. So that's kind of the big difference there. And that is it for M54.